Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Sarah.
I just told Steve he tried to shake my hand. I said, they're sweaty. Don't touch them. It's good to be here. I said that. I'm Sarah Snyder. I'm an alcoholic. I have a sobriety date of September 22nd, 2017, and I have a home group in Raleigh. It's the There Is the Solution group. We meet every Tuesday and Thursday in Cary. Come check us out. It's a good group and apparently pretty similar to this one, so we would love to have you. It's been funny, when Steve was saying like, oh, okay, we're bringing up Sarah, she's from Raleigh, because I just moved here 6 months ago from California, so you'll hear about that later on in my story, but I don't feel like I'm from Raleigh yet. So thanks for having me in your state and at your meeting. I am excited to be speaking on this beautiful day of 420. I never really partook myself in that particular substance, but other substances did become a part of my story, and that is where my alcoholism took me. So I'll talk about that a little bit as well. So growing up, I am a first-generation American. My mom's from Ireland, my dad's from England, and I'm actually the only American in my entire family. And so I really took that and ran with it when I was younger and used that really to isolate myself, separate myself from you, and really just relish in my snowflakeness. And there was lots of different things growing up that I felt like I had a different experience than a lot of my peers because of that. Like Thanksgiving, my parents would kind of like do a Thanksgiving, but they never like grew up with the holiday, so it was always just me, my mom, and my dad like sitting around the table staring at each other. Or we would go to family friends' houses a lot for Thanksgiving and for Christmas and holidays and stuff, because it was just the three of us here in the U.S., right? And so I was really jealous of a lot of people's like family dynamics when I was younger, and they had these like big, extravagant holidays and like the perfect like all-American looking family, and they would have like game nights and like hang out with their families on the weekends and like go, do fun things with their family, and that was like not my experience. My mom and dad very much just like kept to themselves. They didn't really interact with a lot of the other parents, and on the inside, which was what I was comparing to everybody's outside, we were definitely not the perfect, for sure not all-American, but for sure not the idea of an all-American family. I always say that the way that my family liked to communicate is through screaming and throwing and yelling. So throwing things was like a popular form of communication in my households when I was growing up, and I definitely picked that up and carried it with me throughout my entire life, really. And so when I was growing up, I was always getting in trouble. I feel like my behavior was very alcoholic from a young age. Was very, very defiant, always wanted to know why I had to do things, why I had to follow the rules. Things didn't apply to me, the whole shebang. And I actually ended up getting suspended from school when I was in 4th grade, because that's a thing. And I think it was for like drawing on tables and stealing people's lunch cards, and I was just getting in trouble all of the time. I got in trouble in kindergarten for like locking bathroom stalls and then like crawling out from underneath them, so they were like locked from the outside. My mom loves telling that story. And just always in trouble for something, and the school would always call my mom, and I remember her crying one time when I was younger about like, she was like, we just don't know what to do with you. And like I hadn't even picked up a drink yet, and like that was already her experience as a mother of me. Poor thing. So growing up, my dad drank, and he drank until I was in 5th grade, and then he just kind of like stopped drinking one day because I told him like, you're always drunk, and so he like got pissed off and he poured the bottle down the sink and was like, I almost swore, screaming and yelling, and just never drank again. And so I obviously can't say that he is an alcoholic, but I will say he needs a program. And he's relatively dry, right? So he still hasn't picked up a drink. He's still just extremely dry. But I was taught really young from both my mom and my dad not to drink. Drinking is bad. You've seen what it does to your father, blah, 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 like the whole thing. And so for the longest time, I swore off drinking. And I remember when I got into high school, it was sophomore year of high school, and we had like a sober club at my school. And it was like basically like a sobriety club where like people got together to like ban against drinking and doing drugs and whatever. And so first semester of sophomore year, I was getting ready to put on a presentation when we got back from winter break as part of this sober club, and I was going to be speaking to the freshmen about not drinking and doing drugs and all of that. And then I took my first drink over the winter break between first semester and second semester of sophomore year. So then I had to come back and tell all the freshmen that they shouldn't do that. And that was a pretty funny experience. But the first drink that I ever had was tequila out of my friend's parents' liquor cabinet. That was where my love of tequila came from. And I don't recall getting drunk the first time I drank, but I do remember the feeling that it gave me immediately when I took that first drink. And it was just like a feeling of relief. Like I had finally found something, like the thing that I had just been like looking for my entire life, which I didn't even know that I had been looking or searching for anything. But when I picked up that drink, it just like melted everything away, and I felt like I was on top of the world. And so I definitely, wanted to do it again. And so throughout high school, like I just kind of would drink on the weekends. My parents didn't know that I was drinking, so I would like always go to friends' houses, sleep over places. Like I wasn't really home too much when it wasn't during the week, but I was, like sneaking out and just sneaking out to go drink, bringing people to my house and drinking, and just spent the weekends getting drunk. I don't remember ever blacking out when I was in high school, but I was definitely drinking a decent amount. And then when I went off to college, that was when I was really like off to the races. I went to college in Southern California. It was like this small private university, and my parents were kind enough to pay for my education because they didn't want me to have student loans and debt and all of that. So I was going to college on their dime, and once I got to college, my drinking progressed immensely. I remember even the first semester of freshman year, I was already drinking like at least 4 or 5 days a week, probably only still like at nights after classes and that kind of stuff at this point. But I remember like the first night that my parents dropped me off, I remember like the first thing I did was like find someone who was of age, become friends with them like the first night in the dorms. And then we like went to the liquor store, and I was just off to the races. And so my first semester freshman year, things weren't too out of hand, but like they were a little abnormal, I would say. And but I didn't think there was like too big of an issue. I just kind of drank a little more than a lot of other people did. And second semester freshman year, I decided that I wasn't going to drink at all that semester. Okay, there we go. I decided that I wasn't going to drink at all. And so I spent 4 whole months not taking a drink. And it was like a really big deal. And I wanted everybody to know. And like everybody had to understand that I didn't drink for 4 freaking months. Like it was like a big deal. And I remember like being in the room, like I was still like around the environment of everybody drinking. And I remember being like annoyed because I was like, at that point, I was staying sober on pride alone, right? Like I had already gone like the first 2 months, and then like I was studying and people were drinking and playing beer pong and all that. They're like, are you going to drink? And I'm like, no, like just like in my own world, like having an attitude about it. But I ended up pulling a 3.9 that semester, which was the highest GPA that I had gotten, and my dad would never let me live it down. So I partially regret doing that because my full potential that I had always been told that I had really came to fruition, and then I was continued to be held to that standard, which I would never live up to again. And so coming back, like I went back home to Northern California after freshman year and started drinking again with all of my friends. And one of the big like pieces or parts of my story was like, you know how you always hear a lot of people in the rooms be like, I can't be an alcoholic because of like this thing. And for me, that was my college degree. The fact that I was going to school and I was in school for biology, like I was a bio major, like you could not think that I was an alcoholic, because not only am I going to classes, but I'm doing labs on top of it, and like I'm doing all these things, so like there's no way that I could be an alcoholic. And so I had a really big ego about my college degree, and pretty much had to use that as my grounds to stand on to support the fact that I was not an alcoholic. And so I thought very highly of myself in comparison to a lot of my friends that I had in high school who stayed at home. They went to community colleges, or they went to like the state school that was like nearby, and I like thought that I was all that, and because of that. So when I went home, I was like drinking with them again, and then I went back off to school. And I remember going back down to school one time. I had to like go back like 2 days later because I was too drunk for like 48 hours, and like I couldn't drive back down to school. And stuff like that started happening more often. So by the time like junior and senior year rolled around of college, I was going on like 3-4 day benders, just drinking around the clock. I had joined a sorority my sophomore year, not for the philanthropy, but because they were the people who drank on campus. And I probably spent more time with our like brother fraternity than I actually spent with my sorority, and hanging out with all of the girls. And yeah, I just like became almost like the laughing stock of my sorority, but I embraced it as my identity, right? Of like, oh, Sarah's drunk again, and like this is what Sarah did this weekend, and I would just like laugh it off and like embrace it as like that's just who I am. I'm like the fun drunk party girl, like dancing on tables and like doing all of the things. And it's funny because I talk to people who know me now in sobriety, and I'm like, can you picture that version of me? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, I haven't changed that much, like great. But that's just who I was, and I embraced that wholeheartedly. And I remember I would have conversations with my parents, right? They would call me and, you know, tell me how proud of me that they were. I was, I guess at this time, technically the only person in my like immediate family who was going to a 4-year university. So they would tell me how proud of me that they were, and that they were making a lot of sacrifices to put me through school. So like, just keep doing your best and all of that. And I remember feeling so much shame for them, putting me through school, and they would tell me all the time the sacrifices that they were making to do that. And I knew, that I was wearing that double mask, right? That I was just drinking away the experience that they, had been paying for, my education, and I was not treating it as an educational experience in the slightest. And so I would get off the phone with them, and instead of being super motivated to like dive into the books and like go, you know, actually get some work done, I would turn to drinking instead, because I was so ashamed that I had to keep drinking to push down the shame, which would in turn make me more shameful. So I ended up in this like shame cycle, especially on junior and senior year of college. And I like, to this day, I mean, my parents don't even know about half the stuff that I did in college, like, and how bad things had really gotten. They don't know like the amount of classes that I ended up failing, and, you know, all of the things. And so, that as well is like a really big part of my story, is just drinking to cover up the feelings and not actually being willing to look at what was going on and create like, become aware. Like I didn't want to look at my actions or my behaviors or do anything to fix it. Like the bottle was the only thing that I knew to solve my problem, right? Like that was my solution. And I remember like senior year, junior and senior year, like I had started blacking out pretty often and browning out and going in and out on those like 3 or 4 days that I was on a bender. And my friend started telling me in the morning, like, last night, like, you were telling us that you think you might be an alcoholic and, like, you have a problem and, like, all of this stuff. And the only time I would ever say anything or be able to admit that anything was wrong was when I was when I was blacked out, basically. And so in the morning, I would wake up and be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, you're crazy. Can we just, like, go get mimosas? Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I would just, like, play it off, right? And that was just what I did. That was always, like, the identity that I hung on to, was just, like, playing everything off and, just, like, making jokes out of everything, and it was fine. And so I did end up graduating college. I don't have the grades or the attendance record to show that I did, but I have a piece of paper that says that I went to college. And so coming home from school, I moved back in with mommy and daddy and was, like, ready to get my life together, right? Like, that's what you do after college. You kind of put the partying aside and you get your life together. And while I was watching, like, all of my other friends go get jobs, and I was watching my friends from college, like, start their careers, and I was watching all of those friends from home who had been in community colleges and all this start making money and building a life for themselves. I'm like, what is happening? Like, you are the one, like, I'm the one with the college degree. I was the one who was a bio major, and here you guys are, like, living your best life. Like, what is happening? And I could not get my life together. I remember just, like, my parents would leave for the day to go to work. I would be at home, and I remember, like, staying home in bed all day because I was, like, hungover and drunk from the night before, and then I would leave, like, for the bars maybe an hour before they got home, around, like, 4 or 5, and then be out, like, all night. Sometimes I remember my dad was in construction. I remember crossing paths with him at, like, 5, 6 in the morning, like, relatively often, just, like, walking into the house, and, it was just, like, messy, and I remember them being like, well, why aren't you, like, where's your job? Like, why don't you have a job? What are you doing all day? And I'm like, oh, yeah, like, don't worry about it. Don't, like, it's fine. And again, just, like, didn't really want to look at what was going on. And so I had gone on another 3-4 day bender, forgot the fact that I was living back at home with my parents, and they ended up filing a missing persons report because they hadn't heard from me for a couple days. And I remember my friend waking me up at my friend's house, and she was like, Sarah, like, your dad messaged me on Facebook, like, they're looking for you. They like, called the cops. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you're joking. She was like, no, I'm being serious. So I called my mom, and my mom's, like, crying on the phone, and she's like, it's so good to hear your voice. Like, we didn't know what had happened to you, like, all this stuff. And me being extremely selfish and self-centered, just, like, didn't really laugh in her face, but, like, in my head, I remember just being like, she's being so dramatic. Like, this is all, like, just really dramatic right now. And so I went home, and the cop that was, like, in charge of my case file or whatever had to see me in person to close out the missing persons report. So meanwhile, like, while all of this was happening, I had been drunk for, like, 3 or 4 days, right? And I remember, like, I was, like, in and out of a blackout. I remember, like, being in a pool for, like, literally almost 48 hours straight, and I had climbed up on a roof and fallen off down the ladder, broken my collarbone, which I didn't find out for, like, a week later, and just was, like, a hot mess. Like, hadn't showered in 3 or 4 days. So in that state, I'm standing there in my street, and I lived in a court, and the cop comes, like, blaring down the court with, like, the sirens going and everything, and it's, like, noon on, like, a Friday or something, and I'm like, that's so unnecessary again, like, everyone's being so dramatic. And I'm standing there in, like, clothes that are, like, 4 sizes too big, like, a guy's clothing. It's not mine. I haven't showered in, like, 4 days, like, just looking like a hot mess. And I'm standing there with the cop on one side of me and my mom on the other, and the cop's asking me questions like, did you have access to food and water? And I was like, yes, I did. But he was just doing his job, you know. It was like the things that he had to ask to be able to close out the file. But I remember looking at my mom, and, like, she just looked at me like, what is happening right now? Like, who are you? Like, what is this? Like, what is going on? And I always like to say, like, that at this time in my story would have been a really great time for me to get sober, but I didn't. I remember going inside and taking a nap, and then waking up a couple hours later and telling my mom that I was going back out to the bars, or I was going to a friend's house, or going back out anyway to go drink. And she was like, why? Like, she didn't understand. And she was like, where's your car? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, don't know, don't care. Like, and I just left the house, and I had absolutely no regard for her or for anyone else for that matter, and how my drinking was affecting them. And like, the incomprehensible demoralization that I experienced literally just hours before that with the cop and my mom and all of that was like nowhere to be found, because all I knew how to do at that point was drink. Like, that, it didn't even cross my mind that that was not like the logical next step to take. And so I always just like to tell that story, because it's a really one of those really key moments for me where I can like really clearly see the insanity of my disease. And so I did get sober a couple months after that, and I will get to that now. So I always like to share that my bottom was nothing super profound. There was no super big, like, there was no external circumstances that happened, and that's really important for me to share with you, because nothing had to happen for me to get sober. I didn't have to go through anything horrific or experience anything, whatever. I was literally driving home from I wasn't driving, but I did drive drunk a lot, but I wasn't driving that night. I was on my way home from the bar with like one of the only people that would still hang out with me at the end of my drinking, and I was crying because that's what I did when I was drunk. And he was like, why are you crying? And I was like, I just don't want to be drunk anymore. And he was like, what do you mean? Like, go to bed, sleep it off, wake up, you'll be fine. And I'm like, no, you don't get it. Like, I don't want to be drunk anymore. And I have no idea where that came from, right? That wasn't me, because if you would have asked me at that point, like, I would have continued drinking on for like the rest of the foreseeable future. Like, I didn't even think that is what I wanted, or that was where I was at. But looking back, like, I was in this like spin cycle, right? Like in the dryer almost, of just like waking up, getting drunk, going to bed. And that was just like my entire life. And like, I knew that I was capable of so much more. I had these big plans and big dreams and big ideas and vision for my life that I thought was like where I was headed. But on a day-to-day basis, like, obviously my actions weren't leading to that, right? And I just had no purpose. I always say, like, I had no morals, no values. I had no self-respect at all. And I was really just like a shell of a human being. And so looking back on it now, I'm like, of course I didn't want to be drunk anymore. Like, it makes so much sense. But in the time, like, I didn't even know that is what was going on for me. And it's because it wasn't me, right? It was my higher power, which I know today. And so I looked up a noon meeting on my phone. I was like drunk on the curb outside my house, like, I think I need AA, right? Like, trying to find a meeting. And so I found a noon meeting that met every day, Monday through Friday. And I went to that meeting, and all the women there were really nice, right? Like, I walked in, they were like, hi, are you new? And I'm like, how'd you know? Like, what is happening? And it's because I probably still like reeked of alcohol, and just looked like a hot mess. And I felt at home immediately in that meeting. I remember that feeling when I sat in my first meeting was like how I felt when I took my first drink. Like, I had found something that I felt like had been missing. And like, again, like, I didn't know that I had been missing something, but when I came to AA and I heard all of you guys speaking, that was the same feeling that I got. It was like, this is something that I've been missing, and like, this is it, right? And so I remember listening to people's stories and hearing them talk and explain things in ways that I had never heard explained. And you guys were able to put all of my thoughts and my feelings and my actions into words and language that I had never heard before, and that I didn't have my own language or terminology for. And that to me was like a really profound experience. And So just like my first drink, right, like I couldn't wait to do it again. And so I was unemployed, right, when I first started coming to meetings. So I started going to meetings like crazy. Like I remember I just couldn't get enough of it. And I was going to like 3 or 4 meetings a day. And it was what I did all day while all of my friends were, you know, at work and doing productive adult things with their life. And then when they would get off of work, I would meet up with them and go drink. And so I drank for probably like a month while I was still coming to meetings, and it was so interesting, right? Because it was like, I felt like I had found something here that I had never found before, like that same feeling of when I picked up that first drink, but my desire for what you guys had didn't yet outweigh my desire to stop drinking. And so I kept coming to meetings and I kept hearing like what you guys would share here, and I started to become more and more miserable as I continued to drink and understood what the solution was and where I could go. And so I did eventually set a sobriety date, and I drank 30 days later at an Irish Catholic funeral. My grandma had passed away. We were in Ireland, and it was the first time that I drank in front of my whole family. And in that one night, I caused a ton of wreckage. I had to make a lot of amends. And so I came back on the plane, and I was like, okay, like I definitely know where I need to be, right? And so I came back home to California, and that is the sobriety date that I have today. And I started working with a sponsor who, she had like 30 something years, and she was pretty hardcore, and she was pretty pretty out there, pretty loud, and pretty tough on me, which was what I needed at the time, especially in my first year. And I remember sitting in her kitchen with probably like a week or two sober. Like I really didn't have that much time, and we were reading and going through the book, and she had like gotten up to make herself a coffee or something, so she was like on the other side of the room, and she's reading and she's talking to me, and she like turns around all of a sudden and she's like yells from across the room, and she was like, "Are you listening to me?" And I was like, "Oh my God." I'm like, "Yes, I'm listening. Like, what is happening?" And she was like, "Good, because you're gonna have to pass this on to somebody else one day." And I was like, "Excuse me, like, what is happening?" I'm like, "I can't even get my own life together. Like, what do you mean I'm going to have to pass this on to somebody else one day?" But I'm grateful that she did that, because it was ingrained into me very early on that I was like going to, you know, take someone else through the steps one day and share my experience with someone else. And that has been one of my favorite parts of my sobriety, has been sponsoring other women. But yeah, so when I first got here, like, and I was going through the steps for the first time, I didn't really have an issue with God. I was raised in a religion, not super like, not super strict or anything, but I did go to like Catholic middle school, Catholic high school, like all of that thing. I remember being an altar server in like 4th grade. But I wasn't really opposed to God. I was just opposed to the God that I had grown up with. And so doing my second and third step when I got here like wasn't really a problem for me. I remember moving through them really quickly, just because I was like I had been around the rooms for long enough that I knew that I just wanted to get through the steps and do them to the best of my ability as quickly as possible. And so when we got to the second and third step, I was just like, yeah, no problem. Like, I am willing, turn it over, and then we were moving on, right? And I was on to my 4th step. And my first round of steps, like I had a long list of amends to make after my first round of steps, but those amends were some of the most incredible things that I've done. And there were some that were really interesting, right? Where I like had slept with somebody's boyfriend, and that boyfriend is now dead, right? And I have to like figure out like how to make amends for that. Or like just navigate that situation of like making amends to someone for like someone who is now not still with us, right? Or making amends to my parents was like a really profound experience for me. And it was one of the biggest things that I now carry with me today in sobriety, and like coming to learn in my first round of steps with especially my parents, but I now apply it to everyone else, is like everyone is literally just doing the best that they can. And that was something that I never had the wherewithal to care about you enough or see the picture big enough to understand that you were also just trying to do your best and take things one day at a time, right? Like, it was all about me. I was so self-centered and so just worried about how your actions affected me and what you were doing and how it was going to come out for me in the end, that I couldn't even see that you were most likely just trying to do what was best for me, but also that you were just trying to do your best as well. And that's been one of the biggest lessons for me in sobriety that's been really helpful. Other like lessons and things along the way that have been really helpful are staying in my own lane and remembering that other people have their own higher power has been super profound for me. My relationship with my higher power has grown and changed and evolved so much in these first couple years of sobriety, which I'm really grateful for. And I'm really grateful for the ability to make my higher power bigger than my problem today. Like, I can make my higher power as big as I want to and capable of doing whatever it is that, I believe in, right? And that has been a big lesson for me, but being able to like turn over different people and situations in my life has been extremely helpful. And just learning how to focus on myself and my own actions. And I remember I was like sharing at a meeting the other day about how they were reading like that acceptance paragraph on 417 or whatever it is in the back of the book. And I was thinking about how every time that I'm not in like acceptance of a situation of whatever like person, place, or thing is in front of me, it's because I'm trying to change the way that I feel, right? Like, just like I did with a drink, it's because I am uncomfortable or embarrassed or annoyed or ashamed or whatever it is. And so I'm trying to change some person, place, or thing around me because it's uncomfortable for me, for you to act that way, right? It has nothing to do with the other person, and it's about me. And that, like, being able to focus on myself today and look at how I am acting and how I am being, and then being able to bring that to my higher power and pray about it, and then turn to somebody else and focus on someone other than myself in a positive way, right? Not in like a complaining and kind of way has changed my life, right? It's been amazing for me to be able to do that. And so two things that I wanted to share before I'm done here is number one, sponsorship and sponsoring other women has been like the highlight of my sobriety. And even with just like sticking around long enough to see other women come in the program, especially younger women, especially women who are my age. I got sober at the age of 22, right? So it was like I was pretty young when I came into the rooms. And being able to be there for the younger woman has been one of the most amazing things that I've had the pleasure to experience, right? Because I remember coming in and I remember being so annoyed that people, like all the old timers would always come up to me and be like, "You're so lucky to be here as young as you are." And like, be like, "Really? Like, I'm 22 and I'm sitting in an AA meeting. Like, it's not all that in a bag of chips. Thanks." And like, after I had my 1 year though, I think it was around the time between 1 and 2 years. Like, my first year, I was just trying to stay sober and get through my steps. Year 1 to year 2, I saw so much growth because that was when I really had to start practicing the principles in all my affairs. And so it was during that year that I became really grateful that I came into the rooms when I did, that I didn't have to suffer the consequences of my drinking. And I became really grateful that my story unfolded the way that it did, because I remember coming in with a year sober or like in my first year and wondering if like I had had enough consequences, if my story was bad enough for me to be here. And so I was grateful that I had stuck around long enough to see that it didn't matter and that I did belong here because I identified, and that was all that I needed. Anyway, I was talking about sponsorship. Of course, I got back to talking about myself. So there was a woman that I sponsored back in California. She actually ended up moving to Virginia like 6 months before my fiance and I moved out here. But I was sponsoring her, and it was like the wildest thing to me. Like, it was a total God shot that I ended up sponsoring her, because her story was so similar to mine. We actually ended up knowing a lot of the same people. It's funny, like, if you end up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous around where you did a lot of your drinking, like, you end up running into people that you drank with, because we all, like, drink alcoholically, right? So we drank with a lot of the same people, and we knew a lot of the same people, and almost every single experience that she had, that she came to me with, that she struggled with in her first year, was something that I had also been through, that my sponsor had taken me through, that I then understood, like, why I had that experience, and I was able to walk her through it. And I was able to help her understand how to pray in those situations, and what to ask for, and, you know, just like help her navigate those situations. And it became so much more clear to me, like, why everything unfolded the way that it did. And it was during COVID, actually. Like, she had only had like a month or two sober before we went on lockdown and did all of that. And she really did keep me sober during that time, was sponsoring her, and we became really good friends. And she's still sober today, which is amazing. But like, watching her get sober, and she was the first woman that I was able to take through all of the steps, right? Like, I had women who had like made it to their fourth, you know, whatever it was, made it to their eighth. And so being able to take her through all of the steps and be on the other side of it was an incredible experience. And not only that, but like, it brought me closer to my own higher power in so many ways, because I can see things from a much different perspective when I watch someone else go through the same things that I have gone through myself, and I'm just like at a different point in the journey. And so that was really helpful for me, and it kept me on top of my game, because I couldn't be going and like spewing a bunch of stuff to her that I wasn't doing myself, right? And so I had to be like really on top of my own sobriety to not feel even more terrible when I was like giving her advice and like all these things to do, right? And like, here's how to like work the steps, or like apply the principles in this area, if I wasn't doing that myself. And so that was also really helpful for me. And so sponsoring, like, I was always taught really early to keep one hand on a sponsor and one hand on a sponsee, and just to stay in the middle of AA. And that, for the majority of my sobriety, is what I have done. I will say that that was not always my experience. In the year leading up to us moving here, I wasn't going to as many meetings. I hadn't really gone back to too many in-person meetings. And so once I moved here and realized the recovery that is in this area, or in like the Raleigh area at least, like, there's so many meetings. There's a really great AA community, and it was just like another one of those things where I just feel like God just was giving me a little nudge, you know, because I had no idea what the sobriety like community was like in the area. And so yeah, that was incredible, and I've been so blessed to like dive back into my program and hit the ground pretty hard running since we've moved here. And it's been amazing for my life, my relationships. My relationship with my higher power has changed and evolved even more as I have moved here. And there are some things you guys do differently, but I can get over that, right? Like, I was telling Jerry the other day, I have a new sponsor out here that I'm working my steps with, and I was telling him the other day, like, oh yeah, I'm going to go drop my fifth. And he was like, what? I was like, I'm going to go drop my fifth. He's like, what are you talking about? And he was like, your fifth step? And I'm like, yeah, what do you call it? He's like, you just do your fifth. I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to go drop my fifth. And now every time I see him, he's like, oh, I'm just dropping my fifth. I'm like, okay, Jerry. So, you know, there's little quirks and little things that are different, but I'm really grateful to have found the community in AA that I have here. And the last thing that I'll touch on that I wanted to share with you guys was when I moved here, it was such an interesting experience because it felt like being a newcomer all over again. And I think it was it was different for me to have moved here with 5 years and not being around people who had watched me get sober, right? Because it's like I have to come and like already be this sober member of AA. There's like no slack that'll be cut because like you didn't see me like grow up in AA and like come in as a hot mess and like get well, right? Like I just come here and like I have to be well from the start, right? And like when I got here to Raleigh, I just did what I know how to do, what I was taught to do as a newcomer, right? And that was go to meetings, get a sponsor, start working the steps, try and be of service, get involved, and find a fellowship. And that was really the biggest thing that made the difference and an impact on my sobriety. Like, I'm not going to lie, I did sponsor shop for like a month or two when we first got here. And what I did start doing right away, though, was saying yes to everything. Not even just service work, but like when people, they were like, oh, we're going to get coffee after the meeting, or like, oh, we're going to go do this on Saturday. Like, do you want to go? And I'm like, no, not really. Like, I don't want to go hang out with a bunch of people I don't know and like stand there awkwardly and like try and make small talk and like get to know you and like go through that whole phase. Like, no, I don't want to do that. But I said yes, right? And I went anyway. And that was like a really big part of me being able to find a fellowship here. And like literally within 2 or 3 months, like my home group in Raleigh felt like my home group back in the Bay Area. And like it happened that quickly for me just by continuing to show up, putting one foot in front of the other, and just saying yes to everything that was presented to me as an opportunity. Because all I did in that situation was just have faith and have like just a ton of faith in my higher power, that if people were asking me to go somewhere, that there was a reason for that, right? And that there was like a relationship there to be formed, or a connection to be made, or something I needed to hear that would be helpful, right? Like whatever it was, or a woman there that I could help. Like that was another random one, like going to random meetings around, right? And then running into women who were brand new in the program, all of those things. And so that's one of the things that I've been keeping and carrying with me even as we start to settle into the area, is just remembering to tap back into those tools and like those simple steps that I was taught when I was a newcomer, right? Of just always saying yes, working with my sponsor, doing another round of steps, and helping other women. And I will say that my life, my sobriety, again, my mood, my relationships, my relationship with my higher power, all of it has been like amazing these last 6 months in comparison to the year before. Like I honestly didn't feel like my life had gotten totally miserable, but I will tell you it's much better now, having like doing all of the things that the program teaches us to do. So literally everything in my life today has a tie to AA. I wouldn't be standing in front of you in the state of North Carolina if it wasn't for the program, right? Like all my relationships today are from the program. That's how I was able to find friendships and build a community out here in Raleigh when we moved here, was from the program. Met my fiance in the program. Like everything ties back to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm so grateful for that. I don't know where I would be without the program, and the only thing that I can hope for is to be able to pass that on to other women. So I'm super grateful for you guys to having me tonight, and thanks so much.